The SD card was smaller than my thumbnail, hidden inside the hollow heel of my husband's work boot. On it, a video file titled, "Open only if they try to take everything." When I finally watched it, I learned my stepson had already forged my signature and sold my home out from under me for $320,000. That video didn't just save my house, it eventually landed him in a kennel uniform with a shirt that says "Scooped my inheritance," shoveling dog waste on the very property he tried to steal. Here's how the whole collapse unfolded. My name is Lena. I was 47 when it happened, a retired veterinary technician who'd spent the last 15 years helping my husband, David, renovate the old farmhouse on Ridgeline Road. He was the quiet architect who designed the wraparound porch with the angled skylights. I was the one who tuck-pointed the stone foundation with my own hands, mixing mortar in a wheelbarrow until my knuckles bled. Before vet school, I had worked 4 years managing foreclosed properties for a bank, so I could pick a lock, rewire a breaker panel, and gut a drywall ceiling without flinching. I could fix a broken well pump in a sleet storm, pick a padlock when a kennel gate jammed in the middle of a rescue intake, and read a balance sheet better than most accountants because for a decade I'd tracked every penny of our nonprofit animal rescue's donations down to the cost of syringes and milk replacer. That skill set was about to become a weapon. David died on a Tuesday, a massive coronary at his drafting table. The paramedics said it was instant. They let me sit with him for 20 minutes before the funeral home van came. I pressed my forehead to his shirt and tried to memorize the mix of pencil, graphite and coffee that had always clung to him. The house felt hollow the moment they wheeled him out, like a ribcage with the heart torn out. I wandered from room to room, touching the wallpaper we'd hung together, the banister he'd carved by hand, trying to hold the shape of our life in my mind. The funeral home hadn't even taken his body away when the calls started. By Friday afternoon, my stepson Kent and his wife Melinda were pulling into the driveway in a leased black Escalade, wearing matching expressions of grief that looked airbrushed on. Kent was David's son from his first marriage, 41 years old with the emotional depth of a timeshare salesman. He had his father's height but none of his warmth, a man who shook hands with his eyes already scanning the room for the next advantage. Melinda was a former pharmaceutical rep who spoke exclusively in Instagram captions and never touched anything that might chip a gel nail. There was a hollow breeze that afternoon, late September, and a few yellow leaves skittered across the gravel as they climbed out of the car. I watched them from the kitchen window and felt something cold settle in my stomach that had nothing to do with grief. They swept through the house like they were appraising inventory, not mourning a father. Melinda took charge of the sorting, which meant she stood in the center of each room pointing, while Kent hauled armfuls of my husband's belongings into black contractor bags. David's drafting tools, the brass compass and T-square he'd inherited from his own grandfather. His geological survey maps, the ones he'd marked with tiny red darts for every well he'd ever assessed. His collection of vintage architectural magazines, whole decades of the Journal of the American Institute of Architects. She called it clutter. I stood with my back against the hallway wall, gripping the doorframe, my throat so tight I couldn't speak. It was like watching someone strip the skin off a body while the heart still beat. At one point, Melinda held up a framed photograph of David and me on our wedding day, squinted at it and said, "This frame is actually nice. We can reuse it." She popped the photo out and dropped it into the trash. They worked through the mudroom on Saturday morning. I stood in the doorway watching Kent yank David's boots off the wooden rack, the heavy steel-toed red wings David had worn on every job site, the ones he'd resoled twice because he said they were the only things that understood his feet. Kent stuffed them into a trash bag without even checking the toes, and I heard the bag thud onto the pile in the truck bed. That sound, that dull final thud, triggered something in my chest, a chemical shift from numbness to cold clarity. I waited until they drove off to pick up more packing supplies, then walked outside in the grey morning. The bag was heavy. I dragged it across the gravel to the barn, the old structure where I'd kennelled rescue dogs and stored my tools. Sunlight came through the slats in dusty beams. I set the bag on the concrete floor and pulled out the boots one by one, cradling them like I'd cradle a frightened animal. The right boot felt heavier. Not by much, just enough to register in a hand that had palpated thousands of canine abdomens, feeling for tumors or fluid shifts. I turned it upside down. The heel block had been hollowed out, a clean rectangular cavity lined with felt, and inside was a micro SD card in a clear plastic case. Taped to the case was a folded piece of yellow legal paper, the same kind David used for his preliminary sketches, the faint scent of his coffee still on it. In his cramped architect's printing were 5 words: "Do not trust them, save yourself." I sat on a hay bale with the card in my palm, my heart hammering so hard I could see my pulse in my vision. I knew what I was holding. I had handled evidence seizure for foreclosed properties enough times to know that when a dead man leaves you a hidden message with a warning like that, everything that comes next will be a war. I didn't watch the video yet. I wasn't ready. Instead, I slid the card case inside my bra, folded the note into my jeans pocket, and walked back into a house that suddenly felt like enemy territory. The creak of the porch steps sounded different now, like a low growl. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that the truth has a way of coming out, even from the grave. The manipulation began before the funeral flowers wilted. Kent and Melinda sat me down at my own kitchen table, the oak surface still marked with the ghost rings of 1,000 coffee cups. Kent's hand on my shoulder was warm, but it landed with the weight of a leash. Melinda slid a manila folder across the table, her nails clicking like beetle carapaces. "We're worried about you, Lena," Kent said, his voice syrupy. "All alone out here, all this maintenance. You don't need this kind of stress." Inside the folder was a document labeled Durable Power of Attorney and Care Agreement. It authorized Kent to manage all my financial affairs, sell real property, execute deeds, and make medical decisions on my behalf. Melinda had already highlighted the signature lines in neon yellow and stuck little adhesive flags beside them. They pitched it as help. They used words like transition and secure your future. Melinda said I'd be so much happier in their in-law suite, with someone checking on me. Kent mentioned that they had already spoken to a real estate agent, a friend, who could expedite a cash sale of the house for $320,000. He said it like he was doing me a favor, like $320,000 was a gift and not a theft of property worth twice that on the open market. I played weak. This was a skill I'd developed over years of being underestimated by men in hardware stores and bank offices. I let my eyes go slightly unfocused, the way I'd seen elderly clients do when their adult children started taking over. I let my jaw go slack. I said my mind was foggy. The grief was too fresh, I needed time to process. My voice came out thin, reedy. I even let my hands tremble on the table, which wasn't entirely an act. I didn't say no, I didn't say yes. I just let the papers sit there unsigned, and when they pressed I said maybe tomorrow, maybe after I've rested. That bought me 3 days. 3 days of them circling, bringing me soup I didn't want, accidentally removing personal items from my bathroom, and reminding me how much safer I'd be under their roof. On the 4th day I woke to the sound of a diesel engine. A moving truck, 26 feet with a lift gate, was backing into my driveway. Kent had hired a crew of 3 men who began loading my furniture into the truck under Melinda's direction. She had already labeled boxes, most of them containing things she'd decided I didn't need. I managed to intercept my old Subaru before they could touch it, and I loaded into it my tool bag, a duffel of clothes, and the lockbox where I kept our marriage certificate and a few financial records. The SD card stayed in my bra. I watched the farmhouse shrink in the rearview mirror as Kent's Escalade led the way, and I felt like I was being kidnapped in slow motion. We drove 40 miles into a gated subdivision called the Estates at Whispering Pines, a name that sounded like a euphemism for something Harlow. Their McMansion was 6,000 square feet of beige stucco and fake stone veneer, with a 3-car garage and a foyer chandelier the size of a refrigerator. The in-law suite was a converted garage at the far end of the ground floor, accessible through a short hallway off the laundry room. I noticed the lock the first night. The door to the suite was a solid core interior door with a deadbolt installed upside down. The keyhole was on the hallway side. From inside my room there was no thumb turn, no way to unlock it. If someone turned that deadbolt from the outside, I would be trapped. I tested it while they were asleep, pressing my palm flat against the door and feeling the bolt shift in its strike plate. Someone had carefully modified this room to become a cell. That night I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of the twin bed they'd given me, a mattress so thin I could feel the slats through it, and I listened to the central air cycling on and off, rehearsing every self-defense maneuver I'd ever learned. The undercover investigation started the next morning. I made myself small and agreeable. I shuffled around in slippers and a cardigan, drank the chamomile tea Melinda pushed on me, and smiled with the vacant expression of a woman whose memory was full of holes. I let them see me napping in the afternoon, a blanket pulled to my chin, my mouth slightly open. What they didn't see was the way I catalogued everything. Kent's home office was just down the hall from my room, separated by a wall of what turned out to be surprisingly thin drywall. I learned his schedule immediately. Coffee at 7:30 in the Keurig, a series of phone calls starting at 8, a lull around 10 when he'd go to the gym, Home by noon, more calls until 3. Melinda left for pilates and lunch with the girls 3 times a week, leaving the house empty but for the housekeeper who came on Mondays and paid 0 attention to me. I tested the gaps. I'd stand in the hallway looking for the bathroom while Kent was on the phone, and I'd hear fragments: closing date, forgery affidavit, notary stamp, offshore escrow. Each phrase was a brick in the wall of evidence I was building in my mind. A week into my captivity, a piece of mail arrived for me. The mail carrier knew to forward my things, I guess because it landed in Kent's mailbox with my name on it. It was a notice from the county assessor's office, acknowledging a change in ownership for the Ridgeline Road property. The new owner was listed as Ridgeline Asset Holdings, LLC. I stood in the driveway holding that letter and the world tilted. My house had already been sold. Not proposed, not in negotiation. Sold. The closing must have happened weeks ago, probably while David was still alive, using some kind of forged documentation. I folded the letter and tucked it into my waistband, then walked back inside with the same placid smile, as calm as a pond with a dead body anchored at the bottom. I knew I needed to get into that office. The door was locked with a basic residential keyed knob, a quickset with a 5-pin tumbler, nothing commercial, not even a security pin. I'd seen it when the housekeeper accidentally left it ajar. I waited until 2 in the morning on a Sunday, when the house was dead silent and the central air would kick on every 20 minutes to cover any small sounds. I had a lockpick set in my tool bag, a compact Sparrows kit with a tension wrench and a selection of hooks and rakes, a kit I'd kept from my foreclosure days and had maintained out of sheer muscle memory. The hallway was dark, lit only by the green glow of a smoke detector. I knelt at the door, inserted the tension wrench into the bottom of the keyway, and applied light torque with my left thumb. With my right hand, I slid a medium hook into the keyway and began raking the pin tumblers gently, feeling for the tiny give of each pin reaching the shear line. Pin 1 set, a soft click. Pin 2 a bit higher. Pins 3 and 4 were sticky, probably because the lock was cheap and never lubricated. I worked the hook back and forth, my breath held, sweat beading on my upper lip. 90 seconds later the plug rotated and the lock opened with a sound like a secret being told. I slipped inside and closed the door behind me. The office smelled like toner and stale ambition. A large desk dominated the room, its surface clean except for a monitor and a wireless keyboard. A filing cabinet with a push-button lock, which I could bypass later if needed, but the immediate jackpot was the shredder bin. Overflowing. He'd run a cross-cut shredder but hadn't emptied it, and strips of confetti were spilling onto the carpet. I gathered every strip I could find, stuffing them into a pillowcase I'd brought from my room, and crept back to the suite. I locked my own door by wedging a chair under the knob, then spread the confetti across my thin bedspread. It took me until dawn. I pieced the strips together like an autopsy, matching edges and text fragments under the dim light of a bedside lamp. The first document that emerged was a quitclaim deed, transferring the farmhouse from Lena Dobrev to Ridgeline Asset Holdings, LLC, recorded at the county level 10 days before David died. My signature on page 2 was a clumsy forgery, the loops on the L2 sharp, the pen pressure inconsistent. A notary stamp with the name Patricia A. Vance was applied beside it, but the stamp's serial number didn't match the state notary database format. I knew because I'd been a notary myself for the rescue's adoption paperwork, and that serial was bogus. The second document was a wire transfer confirmation from Horizon Title and Escrow, showing $320,000 moving to an offshore bank in Nevis, with the beneficiary account number matching a statement I'd glimpsed in the mail, an account in Kent's name. The third was a title commitment letter listing Kent as the seller. He had signed as the authorized agent for the LLC. My house had been sold before my husband was cold. Then I noticed something else on the desk during my exit. Buried under a stack of unopened mail was a small digital voice recorder, a Sony IC-PX, the kind real estate agents use for dictation. The red recording light was off, but when I pressed play the last file began. It was a conversation between Kent and Melinda, recorded in that very office maybe that night. Their voices were clear and smug. Kent said once the old lady signs the final closing docs, the fund's clear and we're out of here. She can die in the in-law suite for all I care. My father's whole estate finally lands where it belongs. Melinda laughed that hollow, glassy laugh of hers and said, "Just make sure she doesn't find out about the video." Kent said, "What video? The one my dad supposedly made? That's a myth. He was dying, he wasn't a lawyer." There was a pause, then Melinda said, "He was always too clever for his own good. But clever doesn't beat a notary stamp, does it?" Kent chuckled. "Not when you know a guy." I stopped the recording and sat on the floor with my back against the door, the recorder clutched in both hands. That was the moment I finally watched the SD card. I had hidden my old laptop in a false bottomed suitcase I'd built years ago for transporting veterinary supplies across state lines when licensing got tricky. The laptop was ancient, a Dell Latitude with a matte screen and a USB port that still worked. I inserted the micro SD into an adapter and opened the video file. The screen filled with David's face. He was sitting at his drafting table, the same window behind him that he'd looked out for 20 years, the oak tree outside just beginning to turn. He was thinner, his color off, the hollows under his eyes deeper than I'd ever seen. He had recorded this months before he died. His voice was steady but quiet, as if he were trying not to be overheard. "Lena, if you're watching this, my son has made a move. I knew he would. That's why 3 years ago I filed a notice of commencement of action with the county clerk and a UCC1 financing statement that ties the property to our marital trust. Any sale without your notarized consent is void on its face. This video itself is a self-proving affidavit, witnessed and sealed by a notary public. My signature and the notaries are embedded in the metadata. Take it to the title company's legal department. They'll freeze everything. The house is yours, Lena. Use it. Live in it, burn it down, but don't let him profit from what we built." He smiled then, a tired, love-soaked smile, and the screen went black. I sat with my hand over my mouth, tears running into my collar, but I didn't have time to grieve. I had a notary serial to verify, a UCC1 to locate, and a compliance officer to find. The ally arrived the next morning in the form of phone call. I used Kent's landline while he was at the gym and Melinda was out, dialing the number on the title commitment letter for Horizon Title and Escrow. I asked for their legal and compliance department. After 3 transfers, a woman's voice came on the line, crisp and unhurried. Her name was Patricia Okonkwo. I didn't bother with pleasantries. I said, "My name is Lena Dobrev. A fraudulent quitclaim deed was recorded on my property using a forged notary stamp, and the sale proceeds have been wired to an offshore account. I have documentary evidence. Can you freeze the transaction?" There was a pause of exactly 3 seconds, and then her voice shifted from professional to predatory, the good kind of predator, the kind that hunts fraud. She asked for dates, property address, and the names involved. I gave her everything. I described the forged deed, the fake notary, the wire transfer, the voice recording, and the video affidavit. She was silent for a long moment, then said, "Mrs. Dobrev, we have a problem that is also an opportunity. The UCC1 your husband filed with the county acts as a dead man's switch. It placed a cloud on the title that should have flagged the property in our title plant, but a closing agent here, who I suspect is compromised, overrode it. Now that you've brought this to my attention, I can place a hard fraud hold on the entire escrow account, notify the county recorder's office, and initiate a clawback on the offshore wire. But I need something more from you." She explained that the FBI's Financial Crimes Division had an active investigation into a ring of title agents facilitating deed fraud in the state, and my case could break it open if she could catch the perpetrators attempting to finalize a transaction they knew was fraudulent. She needed me to attend the closing meeting at the title office, act compliant, and let them walk into the trap. The moment they tried to execute the final documents, her team and law enforcement would move in. I didn't hesitate. I said yes. The grief I hadn't processed hardened into a resolve I could feel in my molars. The maximum cruelty beat came the morning of the closing meeting. I had returned to the McMansion after that call and resumed my foggy widow act, but now every step was choreographed. The closing was scheduled for 10 o'clock at the very title agency office that had originally mishandled the file, a fact that would later incriminate the compromised closer. I decided to stage a medical scare as a final test, not because I needed more proof of their depravity, but because I needed to cauterize any remaining emotional attachment to the idea of family loyalty. I needed to see, with my own eyes, exactly what they were. I waited until Kent was drinking his espresso at the kitchen island, Melinda scrolling her phone and tapping on some shopping app, both of them dressed for the meeting. Kent in a charcoal suit, Melinda in a cream blouse and those 4-inch pumps that clicked like a countdown. I poured myself a glass of water at the sink, then let the glass slip from my hand. It shattered on the tile. I clutched my chest, made a tearing gurgle from deep in my throat, and let my body fold. I collapsed sideways, hitting the floor with my shoulder and hip, a controlled fall I had practiced the night before in my room, rolling off the bed to perfect the limp sprawl. My head lolled, my eyes half closed but still able to track movement. The room smelled of espresso and shattered glass. Kent glanced down at me. His expression didn't change. There was no flash of panic, no lunge for a phone. He stepped over my stomach, his loafer passing 6 inches from my ribs, and walked directly to my handbag on the counter. He unzipped it, yanked out the plain brown folder I'd deliberately left on top, the one with the unsigned care agreement, and a blank quitclaim draft I'd printed from the internet as bait. He opened the folder, saw the papers, and said, "Finally. Let's go." Melinda looked at me on the floor, her lip curling, and said, "Get up, you're faking." Then she stepped over my ankles, her heel grazing my shin, and followed Kent to the garage. I lay there counting to 60, the cold tile seeping through my cardigan, my mind as clear and sharp as a scalpel. That was the instant any residual family loyalty evaporated. They'd left me to die for a folder of paper. The confrontation was set for a boardroom on the 6th floor of a glass and steel office building downtown, the regional headquarters of Horizon Title. I had dressed carefully that morning, after I got up from the floor and drove separately in my Subaru. Low heels, a navy blazer, my hair pulled back in a neat twist. I had a small digital recorder of my own tucked into an inner pocket, its red light glowing. Patricia had arranged for 2 plainclothes FBI agents to be waiting in an adjacent conference room, the door left an inch ajar, their body mics live and synced to a surveillance van parked in the loading dock. I entered the boardroom at 5 minutes to 10. The room was all mahogany and muted carpet, a long table with 10 leather chairs, a water pitcher sweating condensation, and a wall of windows overlooking the interstate. Kent and Melinda were already seated, Kent drumming his fingers, Melinda reapplying lipstick with a compact mirror. A closing agent I'd never met, a thin man with a bow tie and a sweating brow, was arranging duplicate stacks of documents. His nameplate read Greg Fawcett. He would later be identified as the compromised closer who had overridden the title plant flags. Kent gestured to a chair next to him. "Sit there, Lena. We just need you to sign a few things." He slid a thick stack of papers toward me, the top page labeled Seller's Final Acknowledgement and Disbursement Authorization. A pen was already laid on top, one of those expensive gel pens, black ink. I pulled out my chair and sat, but I didn't pick up the pen. Instead, I folded my hands on the table and looked at Kent, not the blank look of a foggy widow. A direct, level look, the kind a vet gives a dangerously reactive dog right before sedation. My voice came out low and calm, the kind of calm you earn by surviving something far worse than a greedy stepson. "You should have read the fine print, Kent. David wrote it years ago." His smile flickered like a bulb with a loose connection. "What fine print?" I pulled my phone from my blazer pocket, set it on the table with the screen facing them, and pressed play. David's face filled the screen, his voice echoing in that sterile room. "Any sale without your notarized consent is void on its face." I watched Kent's expression cycle from confusion to recognition to naked terror. His jaw went slack, then snapped shut. He lunged for the phone. I caught his wrist. Years of holding thrashing German shepherds for blood draws had given me a grip like a padded vice. I twisted his arm medially, leveraging his own momentum to force him back into his chair. He yelped and Melinda shrieked. That was Patricia's cue. The compliance officer stepped through the door from the adjacent office, flanked by 2 agents in dark suits. Her binder was open to flagged pages, the UCC-1 filing, the notarized video affidavit, and a certified fraud hold notice stamped by the county recorder that very morning. She spoke with the clipped authority of a woman who had dismantled 100 schemes. "Mr. Dobrev, Mrs. Dobrev," she said, though Melinda wasn't a Dobrev legally, but no one corrected her. "You've been recorded and documented committing real estate fraud, wire fraud, forgery, and elder exploitation. This meeting is concluded. The escrow account is frozen. The wire transfer to Nevis is being clawed back. You are both being detained." Greg the closer had gone the color of curdled milk. He began stammering about how he was just following procedure, but an agent was already cuffing his wrists. Kent started shouting about his lawyer, but no lawyer could unsell a house that had never been legally his to sell. Melinda began to cry, her expensive mascara streaking, but it looked like a performance, the end of a play she didn't know she was acting in. As they were led out, Kent turned to me with a face twisted by a hatred so pure it was almost religious. "You'll never get the house back. It's already recorded." I didn't answer, because at 8:30 that morning, before I'd even left the McMansion, I had filed an emergency petition for a quiet title action and a lis pendens with the circuit court, clouding the title so thoroughly that no future buyer, no bank, no insurer would touch it. The house wasn't going anywhere except back to me. The aftermath unfolded like a fast-motion legal documentary. Kent and Melinda were denied bail at the arraignment because the offshore accounts and the fake notary connections suggested a flight risk and a larger conspiracy. The district attorney's office filed additional charges: criminal possession of a forged instrument, identity theft for the forged notary stamp, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Patricia Okonkwo's investigation uncovered that the notary, whose stamp had been used, was a real notary whose identity had been stolen. The actual notary was a retired nurse in Florida who had no idea her commission had been replicated. The shell company, Ridgeline Asset Holdings, was dissolved by the state attorney general. The wire transfer to Nevis was clawed back almost in full, except for about $8,000 in fees that got eaten by the offshore bank's bureaucracy. I received a restitution order for my legal costs and for the emotional distress, though no amount of money could price that. A bench trial lasted 3 days. I testified, Patricia testified, even a forensic document examiner testified about the signature forgery. The judge was a woman named Honorable Sarah Chen, and I learned later she owned a border collie named Scout, which I think predisposed her to dislike people who steal from widows. She found Kent guilty on 3 felony counts and sentenced him to 3 years of probation, 8 months of home confinement with a GPS ankle monitor, and 400 hours of community service. Melinda took a plea deal, rolled over on Greg Fawcett and a third participant at the title office, and got 2 years of probation with a strict no-contact order. Fawcett was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison. Their McMansion went into foreclosure 6 months after that because their entire financial house was leveraged on debt and the illusion of income. I watched the auction notice online, a single paragraph on a county website, and felt nothing but the clean hum of an engine that's finally had its oil changed. The farmhouse was mine again, free and clear. The quiet title action was granted in a 4-page order from Judge Chen, which I laminated and nailed to the barn door. I moved back in on a Thursday afternoon and stood in the middle of the empty kitchen, the place smelling of dust and old wood and David's memory, and I sobbed for the first time since the funeral. I sobbed until my ribs ached, and then I washed my face in the cold water of the kitchen sink, and I got to work. I didn't want the house to just be a house anymore. I wanted it to be a living monument to the truth, a machine that turned cruelty into something useful. I used the restitution funds, a small business loan from a credit union that appreciated a business plan written by a woman who could gut a foreclosure, and my own savings to open, forged Deed Dog Kennel, a full-service boarding and training facility on the same 5 acres where Kent had tried to erase me. I designed the kennel myself, drawing on decades of veterinary and rescue experience. 12 indoor-outdoor runs with radiant heated floors, pinch-proof gates, a climate-controlled isolation ward for post-surgical boarders, and a security camera system that sent alerts to my phone if a gate so much as vibrated. The reception desk was built from the reclaimed oak of the wraparound porch David built, the one with the skylights. The logo I commissioned was a stylized dog paw holding a gavel. I hired 2 full-time vet techs, a part-time groomer, and 1 very specific employee. As a condition of his community service, Kent was assigned to my kennel. Judge Chen, when I approached her through the probation office, found it poetically appropriate. She amended his order to specify that his 400 hours must be served under my supervision at the kennel, performing custodial and grounds maintenance. In plain English, he scoops waste. He scrubs runs, empties kennel drains, and mucks out the exercise yard. I had a uniform made for him. It's a navy polo shirt with the kennel logo on the front, the paw and gavel. But the back is what matters. In large white block letters, the words "scooped my inheritance" are embroidered right between his shoulder blades. He wears it every shift, and if he forgets to put it on, I send him home, and that day doesn't count toward his hours, a condition I report directly to his probation officer. The shirt has become a minor internet sensation. Clients take selfies with him in the background, the embroidery perfectly legible, and tag us on social media. The local paper, the Ridgeline Gazette, ran a feature with the headline, "From Deed Fraud to Dog Waste." I framed that article and hung it in the lobby next to a laminated copy of the docket sheet. Every single boarding tag that prints from our point-of-sale system automatically includes a footer line at the bottom in small but readable type. Property restored per docket no. 23 CF 0471. When a client picks up their Labrador or their anxious little terrier mix and sees that number, they sometimes ask. I tell them the short version. I tell them about the boot, the SD card, the note. And they look out the window at Kent, who is usually power washing a kennel drain or shoveling a wheelbarrow full of soiled straw with his head down, and they nod in a way that says justice is real, and it tastes a lot like bleach and dog fur. David's foresight saved me, but it was the quiet, unglamorous work, the piecing together of shredded documents on a thin mattress, the lock-picking under the hum of an air conditioner, the pretending to be foggy while my mind was a spreadsheet, the refusal to sign a single line that got me from a moving truck, and a prayer to where I am now. I still keep that SD card in a fireproof safe, next to the yellow note. Sometimes I hold it and think about the man who built a porch with skylights angled exactly to catch the morning light on my face, who spent his final months threading a legal needle to protect me from his own bloodline. That's the kind of love that doesn't fade. That's the kind of integrity that outlives fraud. If there's a lesson in all of this, it's not about revenge. It's about boundaries. Boundaries are not walls to keep people out. They are the deed that says exactly where your property line runs, and once you know it, you defend it with every quiet skill you've ever learned. Family doesn't get a pass to trespass on your life, and sometimes the best consequence isn't loud. It's a shirt that tells the truth in 32-point embroidery while a man shovels what he sowed. Have you ever discovered a dark secret about someone you trusted completely? How did you handle it? I'd love to read your story in the comments. And if this story resonated, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more tales of quiet competence and justice served cold. I'll be back with another one soon.